We live in a world that treats popularity as proof of psychological health. If you're surrounded, you are assumed to be whole. If you are alone, you are assumed to be broken. But history, psychology, and lived experience tell a far more unsettling truth. Some people lack friends because they are deficient. They lack friends because they are different in structure, not value. Tonight, we confront 5 personality traits commonly found in people who walk alone, not as a failure, but as a psychological pattern that few understand and even fewer survive. Some people are not shaped by the room they enter. The room is shaped by them noticing it, while most individuals unconsciously look outward to calibrate themselves, seeking cues, approval, feedback, and reassurance. There exists a quieter personality structure that moves in the opposite direction. These individuals are oriented inward. Their primary reference point is not social reaction, but inner coherence. They consult an internal compass before they consult consensus, and this alone sets them apart in ways that are often misunderstood. An inward-oriented person does not ask, "How am I being received?" as their first question. They ask, "Is this aligned with what I know to be true?" Their behavior is governed less by adaptation and more by resonance. If something feels false internally, no amount of external reward can fully compensate for the psychological cost. This makes them appear resistant, distant, or even aloof, but the reality is more precise. They are loyal to an inner standard most people never develop. This orientation usually forms early. Often, these individuals learned consciously or not that external validation was unreliable, inconsistent, or shallow. Instead of collapsing under that instability, they turned inward and began constructing meaning from within. Over time, this inward anchoring becomes not a defense, but a way of being. They are less reactive to praise and less devastated by rejection because neither penetrates as deeply as people expect. However, this also makes social life complex. Many social interactions rely on rapid feedback loops, affirmation exchanged for affirmation, agreement exchanged for belonging. Inward-oriented people interrupt this loop. They pause, they reflect, they respond slowly, sometimes uncomfortably so. Their silence is not emptiness, it is processing. Yet in a culture that equates immediacy with sincerity, reflection is misread as detachment. They are also less willing to perform identity, where others subtly reshape opinions, tone, or values to maintain harmony. The inward-oriented individual experiences such adjustments as inner fragmentation. Each small betrayal of truth creates psychological friction. Over time, they choose consistency over connection, not because they dislike people, but because they dislike losing themselves. This creates a paradox. These individuals often possess deep empathy and emotional intelligence, yet they struggle to form casual bonds. They can sense others deeply but cannot pretend easily. They listen well but speak only when something real needs to be said. Small talk feels invasive rather than connective. Surface-level interaction drains them not because it is social, but because it lacks substance. Their inward orientation also means they are acutely aware of their own contradictions. While many people project unresolved conflicts outward, these individuals encounter them internally. They wrestle with doubt, morality, fear, and desire in private. This internal confrontation builds depth, but it also creates seriousness that others find heavy. They are often told to lighten up, unaware that levity cannot be manufactured when one is engaged in inner work, because their sense of identity is internally regulated. They are difficult to influence, but also difficult to reassure. Compliments feel pleasant, but unnecessary. Criticism may sting, but it does not define them. This emotional independence can be unsettling to others, who unconsciously rely on mutual validation to feel secure. When someone does not need what the group offers, the group begins to question them. Loneliness often follows not as a tragedy, but as a consequence. Inward-oriented individuals do not bond quickly because bonding requires shared illusion, shared avoidance, or shared performance. They wait for something rare, mutual authenticity. Until then, solitude feels cleaner than compromise. Silence feels safer than distortion. Yet this solitude is not empty. It is active. It is filled with reflection, meaning-making, imagination, and inner dialogue. These individuals are rarely bored when alone because their inner world is structured, alive, and demanding. They may feel lonely among people and whole in isolation, which reverses the usual assumption about social health. When they do form relationships, those relationships tend to be intense, slow-growing, and transformative. They are not interested in being liked. They are interested in being real. They do not seek to belong everywhere. They seek to belong nowhere falsely. Their inward orientation makes them resistant to trends, immune to shallow persuasion, and committed to a path that often separates them from the majority. And because society measures health by visibility, popularity, and outward engagement, these individuals are frequently mislabeled as withdrawn or deficient, when in truth they are simply governed by a different psychological center, one that values inner alignment over external affirmation, inner truth over social harmony, inner stability over collective noise, and the quiet authority of the self over the loud consensus of the crowd, which is why they move through the world with fewer companions but a stronger sense of self, carrying an internal weight that does not ask to be shared, only honored. And this inward gravity shapes every choice they make, every relationship they decline, every silence they keep, every moment they pause instead of reacting, because their life is not lived for display but for depth. Some people do not experience reality at its surface. They enter a room and immediately sense what is unspoken. The tension beneath politeness, the insecurity hidden inside confidence, the hostility disguised as humor. While others register words and gestures, these individuals register undercurrents. They perceive what most people unconsciously avoid because acknowledging it would be psychologically inconvenient. This trait is not learned through theory, it is shaped through sensitivity. Their psyche is attuned to contradiction. When someone smiles but their eyes tighten, it is noticed. When enthusiasm feels forced, it is felt. When harmony is manufactured to prevent conflict, the falseness becomes loud. These perceptions are not judgments, they are automatic recognitions. And because they cannot be turned off, they shape how these individuals relate to others. Most people survive socially by selective blindness. They ignore what threatens comfort. They overlook inconsistency to preserve belonging. They downplay emotional truth to keep relationships intact. But those who perceive deeply cannot participate in this collective avoidance without inner disturbance. What others suppress, they absorb. What others deny, they register. This creates a constant friction between inner perception and external expectation. Because they notice emotional undercurrents, they often appear serious or intense. They respond to the energy of a conversation rather than its content. A casual joke that masks resentment does not feel casual to them. A compliment that carries envy feels unstable. A friendly interaction that hides competition feels unsafe. Over time, this makes ordinary social environments feel psychologically noisy, crowded with unacknowledged signals. Their perception also turns inward. They are not only aware of others' contradictions, but their own. They sense when their words are not aligned with their feelings. They notice when they agree out of fear rather than truth. This self-awareness creates integrity, but also discomfort. There is no refuge in ignorance. They cannot easily deceive themselves, which makes growth unavoidable and denial impossible. This depth of perception often originates early, in environments where reading emotional signals was necessary. When words could not be trusted, attention shifted to tone. When safety depended on awareness, sensitivity became survival. Over time, this vigilance transformed into intuition. What once protected them now defines them, even when the danger has passed. Yet society rarely rewards this kind of perception. Groups function on shared assumptions and unspoken agreements. Calling attention to underlying tension disrupts cohesion. Naming emotional truth threatens stability. Those who perceive what others avoid often feel pressure to stay silent, to soften their observations, to dilute their honesty. When they speak plainly, they are labeled negative, critical, or difficult. Silence becomes a strategy, not because they have nothing to say, but because they see too much. Speaking would require dismantling illusions others rely on, and dismantling illusions is rarely welcomed. Over time, these individuals learn that truth without timing becomes isolation, so they withdraw, choosing inner clarity over social approval. This withdrawal is frequently misunderstood as arrogance or emotional distance. In reality, it is restraint. They are not detached. They are containing themselves. They are aware that their perceptions carry weight. A single honest observation could destabilize a group dynamic, expose insecurity, or force confrontation. They learn to hold what they see rather than impose it. Because of this, relationships become rare and selective. They seek those who can tolerate depth without defensiveness, those who can hear truth without collapse, those who are curious about their own inner life rather than threatened by it. Until such people appear, solitude feels safer than constant self-censorship. This perceptive nature also explains why they are often drawn to creative, philosophical, or psychological pursuits. Art, writing, reflection, and analysis provide channels where perception can exist without social consequence. These spaces allow truth to be explored rather than suppressed. There, their sensitivity becomes a strength rather than a liability. Yet the cost remains. Seeing what others avoid means carrying emotional information alone. It means noticing fractures long before they become visible. It means feeling endings before they arrive. It means recognizing self-deception, even when everyone else participates in it. This awareness creates a quiet grief, not dramatic but persistent, born from living among people who cannot or will not see themselves. Still, this trait is not a curse. It is a form of psychological realism. Those who perceive deeply are often the first to sense when something is wrong, when change is necessary, when a relationship is hollow, when a path is misaligned. Their awareness protects them from living entirely false lives, even if it costs them comfort. They move through the world with heightened perception, carrying truths that rarely find a place to land, navigating relationships carefully, choosing silence over distortion, distance over denial, depth over ease. And while others protect themselves by not seeing, they endure the weight of seeing clearly. Because once the psyche has learned to recognize emotional truth beneath the surface, it cannot unlearn it, and this persistent awareness shapes every interaction, every withdrawal, every moment of solitude, as they continue to perceive what others avoid, not out of superiority, but because the inner structure makes blindness impossible. Every social environment demands a certain performance. There are acceptable emotions, approved opinions, rehearsed reactions, and subtle rules governing how much truth may safely be revealed. Most people learn to wear this mask so fluently that it no longer feels like a mask at all. It becomes second nature. But some individuals experience this performance as psychological strain from the very beginning, as if something inside them resists being shaped for display. These individuals can wear the mask, but only briefly. They understand social cues, politeness, and expectation, yet maintaining a persona that contradicts their inner state creates friction they cannot ignore. The longer they pretend, the more fragmented they feel. What others call adaptability, they experience as self-erasure. Over time, the cost becomes too high, and the mask begins to slip. This refusal is not rebellion for its own sake. It is not a desire to shock or stand apart. It is a consequence of inner awareness. When a person is deeply attuned to their own emotional reality, any false expression registers immediately as dissonance. Smiling when sadness is present, agreeing when doubt exists, laughing when nothing feels humorous, each act leaves a residue of inner tension. Accumulated over time, that tension becomes unbearable. Most people tolerate this discomfort because social belonging provides compensation. Approval, inclusion, and reassurance soften the internal cost. But for those who refuse to wear the mask for long, the reward is insufficient. External acceptance cannot outweigh internal conflict. They would rather be misunderstood than internally divided, rather be alone than live in contradiction. Because of this, they often appear inconsistent to others. At first, they may seem agreeable, attentive, even charming. But as time passes, their restraint weakens. They speak more directly. They question assumptions. They withdraw enthusiasm that was never fully genuine. People interpret this shift as moodiness or withdrawal, unaware that what they are witnessing is not change but exposure. This pattern affects relationships deeply. Early connections often form smoothly, only to strain later when the individual stops performing. Friends may feel confused or rejected. He used to be more open, they say, when in truth the individual has simply stopped pretending. The social bond, built on shared masks, cannot survive the removal of one. The refusal to wear the mask also creates moral tension. These individuals struggle with flattery, exaggeration, and polite dishonesty. They find it difficult to praise what they do not respect or to agree merely to maintain harmony. This makes them appear blunt or severe, when in fact they are bound by inner ethics. Their honesty is not aggressive. It is restrained integrity. In professional and social settings, this trait often leads to misunderstanding. Authority structures rely on conformity. Groups rely on unspoken agreements. When someone cannot maintain the expected role, they disrupt the system simply by being real. This is rarely forgiven. They are labeled difficult, intense, or antisocial, when in reality they are psychologically allergic to sustained pretense. Internally, this refusal creates both freedom and isolation. Freedom, because they are not constantly monitoring themselves for approval. Isolation, because authenticity narrows the field of connection. Fewer people are willing to meet without armor. Fewer conversations survive honesty. The individual learns that depth costs companionship. Yet their solitude is not empty. Without the mask, they experience a rare coherence. Their thoughts, emotions, and actions align. There's no need to remember who they pretended to be, no energy spent managing impressions. This inner unity becomes a quiet source of strength, even when external life feels sparse. Over time, they become selective. They choose environments where fewer masks are required. They gravitate toward those who speak plainly, feel deeply, and tolerate silence. When such connections occur, they are intense and rare, built not on performance, but on mutual recognition. The world often interprets mask refusal as rigidity or arrogance, but it is neither. It is a commitment to psychological truth. These individuals understand, often painfully, that every mask worn too long becomes a prison. They sense that living behind a persona slowly erodes the self until nothing solid remains. So they remove it again and again, despite the cost. They may adapt briefly for survival, courtesy, or necessity, but they cannot sustain a life built on appearances. Their inner structure demands congruence. When forced to choose between belonging and self-respect, they choose the latter, even when it leads to distance, misunderstanding, or loneliness. Because for them, living without the mask is not a preference, but a requirement of remaining whole. And this refusal shapes their relationships, their reputation, their solitude, and their path, as they continue to step out of roles that feel false, knowing that authenticity will cost them comfort, but preserve their inner integrity. Most people move through life guided by an unspoken question: where do I fit? Their choices, relationships, and values are shaped by a desire to remain connected to a group, tradition, or identity that offers safety and recognition. But some individuals are governed by a different inner question, one that quietly separates them from the collective. Who am I becoming? This question does not seek approval. It seeks alignment, and it drives them along a path that often leads away from belonging rather than toward it. Individuation is not rebellion. It is not rejection of society or contempt for others. It is a psychological necessity rooted in the need to become a distinct, integrated self, rather than a reflection of collective expectations. For these individuals, conformity feels like stagnation. Remaining psychologically unchanged for the sake of acceptance feels like a slow erosion of identity. Growth, even when painful, feels more honest than comfort. This drive often emerges early. Sometimes in subtle ways, they notice inconsistencies between what they are expected to value and what resonates internally. They sense when inherited beliefs no longer fit their experience. While others suppress these discrepancies to maintain harmony, they cannot. The tension becomes internal pressure, demanding resolution. Over time, this pressure pushes them to question, to separate, and to redefine themselves. Because belonging often requires agreement, individuation introduces conflict. Families, communities, and peer groups depend on shared narratives. When one person begins to change, the system resists. These individuals feel this resistance keenly. They are told they are overthinking, becoming distant, or abandoning their roots. Yet what others call disloyalty is for them psychological survival. They are not driven by the need to be different. They are driven by the need to be whole. This distinction matters. Difference is an outcome, not a goal. As they integrate parts of themselves that were previously suppressed out, ambition, sensitivity, creativity, they naturally diverge from the norm. Their inner landscape becomes more complex, less predictable, and harder to categorize. This complexity complicates relationships. Belonging thrives on sameness and predictability. Individuation introduces change and uncertainty. Friends who once related easily may struggle to recognize them. Shared interests dissolve. Conversations feel misaligned. The individual senses that staying connected would require regression, a shrinking back into a previous version of themselves. Loneliness becomes a companion during this process, not because they desire isolation, but because transformation is rarely collective. Few are willing to grow at the same pace or in the same direction. These individuals learn to tolerate solitude not as punishment, but as space. Space to reflect, to integrate, to confront inner contradictions without interference. The drive toward individuation also demands responsibility. Without collective scripts, they must author their own values. Without social consensus, they must decide what is meaningful. This freedom is heavy. There is no one to blame, no group to hide behind. Every choice reflects back on the self. This weight matures them quickly, often making them appear serious or intense compared to their peers. They are often drawn to disciplines that support self-inquiry, philosophy, psychology, art, spirituality, or solitary crafts. These fields offer mirrors rather than instructions. They provide tools for exploration rather than rules for behavior. Through them, these individuals continue shaping an identity that feels earned rather than assigned. Yet the cost remains visible. Belonging offers warmth, validation, and ease. Individuation offers clarity, depth, and coherence, but rarely comfort. These individuals watch others settle into roles, relationships, and identities that seem to provide security while they remain in motion, unfinished. Doubt accompanies them, but so does vitality. Over time, a quiet confidence forms, not the loud confidence of social success, but the grounded confidence of self-trust. They know who they are not, even if who they are is still unfolding. This knowledge protects them from living borrowed lives. It also limits the number of people who can walk alongside them. When they do find companions, those relationships are built on mutual respect for difference rather than shared conformity. They do not seek to merge identities, they seek to witness one another's becoming. Such connections are rare, but they are resilient because they are not threatened by change. Society often misinterprets this path as selfishness or detachment, yet it is neither. It is a commitment to psychological truth over social ease. These individuals understand, often intuitively, that a life lived entirely for belonging risks ending without ever meeting the self that could have been, and so they continue forward, choosing growth over acceptance, transformation over comfort, inner coherence over external approval, even when that choice distances them from the many in favor of a deeper alignment with who they are becoming. Some people form connections easily. They move from conversation to companionship with little friction, collecting relationships as naturally as others collect experiences. But there exists another psychological pattern, quieter and far more selective, defined not by an inability to connect, but by a refusal to do so lightly. These individuals attach deeply but rarely, and this rarity is often mistaken for emotional distance or social deficiency. Their inner world is not casual. When they open themselves to another person, they do so fully. Attention, loyalty, emotional presence, and psychological investment follow. Because attachment carries weight for them, it cannot be scattered. To attach without depth would feel irresponsible, even dangerous. They sense intuitively that every bond shapes the psyche, and they choose carefully what they allow to influence them. This selectivity often develops early. Experiences of betrayal, inconsistency, or emotional unpredictability teach them that connection is not neutral. It alters trust, self-perception, and emotional stability. Rather than closing themselves off, they become discerning. They learn to observe before committing, to listen before revealing, to wait before attaching. Time becomes their filter. Because of this, they may go long periods without close relationships. From the outside, this looks like isolation. Internally, it feels like restraint. They are not searching for company. They are searching for resonance. When conversation remains on the surface, they remain polite but distant. When emotional safety is unclear, they hold back. Attachment is reserved for those who demonstrate consistency, depth, and psychological maturity. When attachment does occur, it is unmistakable. They are present, they remember details, they invest energy, they offer honesty even when it is uncomfortable. Their loyalty is not performative, it is structural. They do not maintain relationships through constant contact, but through depth of understanding. This intensity can surprise those accustomed to lighter bonds. However, such depth also brings vulnerability. When these individuals attach, they expose their inner life. They allow another person access to their fears, values, and private reflections. This exposure cannot be easily undone. Loss, betrayal, or disappointment therefore carries amplified impact. The pain of a broken bond lingers longer, not because they are fragile, but because the bond was real. For this reason, they do not rush attachment. They study character quietly. They notice how someone handles conflict, boundaries, and truth. They watch for emotional responsibility rather than charm. They value reliability over excitement. Only when trust accumulates over time does attachment emerge, slow but solid. This pattern often leads to misunderstanding. Others may assume disinterest, aloofness, or superiority. In reality, these individuals are protecting something delicate, their capacity for depth. They know that attaching to the wrong person does not merely waste time, it destabilizes the inner world. So they choose absence over entanglement, solitude over compromise. Their rare attachments often carry transformative quality. These relationships are not about distraction or routine, they are about mutual growth. Conversations move quickly into meaning. Silence is comfortable. Differences are explored rather than avoided. Conflict, when it arises, is engaged directly rather than suppressed. Such bonds do not rely on constant reassurance because they are rooted in understanding. Because these individuals attach so rarely, the loss of a significant relationship can leave a long void. They do not replace people easily. Each bond is unique, not interchangeable. Healing takes time, and during that time they may appear withdrawn. Yet this withdrawal is not stagnation, it is integration. They process loss internally, extracting meaning before moving forward. This depth of attachment also means they are deeply affected by those they love. Another person's suffering is felt keenly. Their joy resonates strongly. Empathy runs deep. This emotional permeability makes them careful about who they allow close, knowing that attachment opens channels that cannot be closed at will. Over time, they accept that their relational landscape will be sparse but meaningful. They stop measuring connection by quantity and begin honoring quality. They no longer envy social abundance because they understand its cost. They recognize that many relationships require a dilution of self they are unwilling to perform. When they encounter someone capable of meeting them at depth, the connection feels immediate yet grounded. There is no rush, no performance, no inflation. Just recognition. These bonds often endure because they are built on truth rather than need. Society may label them as reserved, selective, or difficult to know, but beneath this reserve lies profound capacity for connection. They are not closed, they are precise, they are not distant, they are discerning. Their rare attachments carry a gravity that reshapes both people involved, leaving marks that persist long after circumstances change, because when they choose to attach, they do so with their whole psyche, aware of the risk, accepting the cost, and honoring the depth that such connection demands.